Welcome to Carrying Wayward, a supernatural podcast for fans who aren't ready to let go and newcomers to the series who are ready to jump in. I'm Marie Vigourou.
And I'm Drew Schulman. In this episode, we're diving into Supernatural, Season 7, Episode 17, The Born Again Identity. Let's get this show on the road. Seeing the title of this episode and then seeing the episode, what a brilliant title. It has been a roller coaster this last few episodes of just reveals and shit.
Yes.
Where we are right now in viewing versus recording, I've also seen the Bobby Ghost cliffhanger ending. So I'm just being riddled with, hey, all those emotional beats that ruined you and made you sad, surprise, they're all back. And I don't believe Bobby's coming back permanently. It's just a little end of season thing for him, I'm assuming. But we'll get to that in a few episodes. Again, I know Cass remains in the show a bit longer, so this being his introduction, totally caught me off guard. I had no clue going into this that we were getting a surprise Cass episode.
To be fair, I think the episode description is Misha Collins returns. So
Oh, is it really?
Yes, absolutely. It's the top billing. It's Misha Collins returns.
I actively try not to read them sometimes because they do tend to be really poor. I will mention I recently somehow ended up reading the mini Disney Plus descriptions for a bunch of X-Files episodes coming up. And I've been horribly spoiled for something towards the end of the series now. Really? You're just gonna put that in the bastards.
Yes.
So luckily I didn't do it here. I was actually surprised to get Cass back. Again, as much as I knew he was coming, I had already banked on it being maybe next season we'll bring him back at the post-Gamble era.
They had to bring him back pretty quickly, and we'll talk about that in Critical Time. But he's back. He's back. And that's so exciting. I'm very happy about this.
Very happy.
Yeah, I know. It's oh, okay. We've had a string of episodes that kind of remind us of why we like the show, right? Because anyway, I don't want to speak for you, but for me, it's season 7 is always very challenging to get through. And particularly this time, because we had to spend so much time on each episode, I was just oh my God, we're just never gonna get out of this.
I gave season 7 a little bit more of you know what, let me play the optimist here. Sure, it's weird, it's different, but I'm gonna give it enough trust to say let's see what happens. And looking back in retrospect, these last 2 or 3 episodes compared to the rest of the season, and I'm oh God, season 7 sucked.
So the first half of season 7 to me is pretty awful. Let's be very clear. I just don't like it. I don't think it's good. There's a lot of potential, but it's just, I don't think the execution is where it should be. But at this point, from Repo Man on, I feel like feedback was heard, right? They're oh, okay, we need to claw back on some changes that we made in order to retain our fan base.
That's honestly the best way to describe it. It really feels like they tried something with season 7, got the feedback of people are kind of not, and they're okay, fine, how much can we reverse and make it seem now we get to recover all the mistakes. And while it really just seems execs being oh, you killed a character they liked, bring him back, it's being done in such a way where this was a very enjoyable episode. Heck, even Meg was fun.
Yeah, it was nice to see Meg. There's just a lot of really cool stuff in this episode that happens. We get to have an almost close-up of Misha's butt in his pants, which I mean, I'm never gonna say no to that, so
We'll talk about Emmanuel / Cass a little bit in story time, but just to say it now, there is a level of, again, just Misha Collins' freaking acting skills of being able to play this character who was not Cass, but has so many little Cassisms to him because it is still Cass, while not being blunt about it. That to me is such a weird, it's I can't think of a good example, but have you ever seen a British actor play an American character doing a fake British accent in character?
No, actually, I never have seen that, I don't think.
It happens on House. I'm 100% sure Hugh Laurie does it on House
at
some point.
Yes, that's right. You're correct.
It's that level of oh, I can play British because I am British, but the character I'm playing isn't, and I need to focus that through. That is one of those little acting chop things that just Mwah. Le kiss.
That was truly beautiful. And I guess on a more personal note, like you and I have not recorded like in almost a month at this point because life hit me pretty hard like right before Christmas. I mean, you too, in a different way.
We all had a weird holiday.
This is literally the longest that I've gone without watching Supernatural since I started watching it in 2016.
For listeners, during that month period, we got to see each other in person over the holidays, which is a really big bonus. Now that I live in another province, getting those like rare, like no show note related thing, just like we get to catch up with friends and each other, is such like a blessing. And seeing your little one and talking video games, that was fun.
I know. He plays Fortnite now. Oh my God.
I just reinstalled and updated my skins, so whenever he's online next, I can jump into a game with him.
Excellent. He's going to be so happy about that.
He's gonna carry my ass. I am no good.
He's getting pretty good, actually, just letting you know.
It's a really weird thing where I do a lot of gaming, but I'm not very good at gaming.
I don't think you need to be good at stuff in order to enjoy it.
It's the other people who are good that I play with that notice it and go, oh, honey.
Oh, no. Well, are we ready for the recap this week?
I certainly am. Count me down.
Fantastic. 3, 2, 1, go.
Sam starts the episode running through town, kind of like at the end of his rope. We find out that he has just been fighting Lucifer in his head nonstop, and it's been like 4, almost 5 days of no sleep. And he's pretty much on the end. And after doing some drugs with a stranger, he ends up in a hospital under a like lockdown psych ward. Dean then goes on a rampage of trying to figure out if he can find someone to help Sam, ultimately finding another hunter who had his blindness in one eye cured to show up and find that this surprise faith healer, 1, is not there, 2, his wife is being attacked by demons, and 3, is bloody Cass. And not just like there was a moment where I thought maybe it was like a lookalike thing or like a weird thing. No, it's actually Cass. He survived this whole mess and was found naked and wet. And this woman was like, oh boy, I'm marrying this one. And named himself after from babies.com. Anyways, and then Sam is dealing with another really regular ghost case, but in the asylum that he's in, or the psych ward that he's in, with this poor girl who thinks she's crazy, but is actually just haunted, which is a whole other bucket of worms that I think we can dive into a little bit. He ends up helping her, and then gets attacked by a demon through electrolysis, and then Cass remembers everything and poofs a bunch of demons, and Mega's there, and she's all like, I'm just your friend now, deal with it. She gets a job at the hospital. Cass absorbs Lucifer, so Sam is safe, but he's possessed now by Lucifer's memories and is in the hospital in Sam's place, which is, I guess, the thing they don't like swap each other out. It's a thing they can do, I guess. Like, check in, check out rule. But Sam and Dean are kind of back to status quo, while Cass is in an asylum psych ward, being watched over by Meg. Time.
There's a lot that happens in this episode because this was like, we need this to happen for the plot. Like, literally, like, we need to cram all of this in.
But you know what? I feel like we've had a few other episodes this season, and I think we even like shit talked one of them where it was very like, we have to cram this thing into an episode.
Mm-hmm.
But because this wasn't like, let's try to fit this plot point into a pre-existing script, and it was an episode about that plot point, the cast coming back and Sam being air quotes cured. I'm not sure how to phrase that properly, but it worked really well and was an ultimately really fun episode.
I think it worked really well, but I think the reality of it is like, we need to fit this into an episode, right? Like, we need to make this happen. How do we make it happen? And I think a lot of what happens is in direct response to that, to needing to make it happen, right?
Yet it never felt like they were cramming too much at us. Like, I feel like sometimes, like some of the season finales in the first few seasons, it feels like they're trying to get too much into like a small block of time. And here, it felt like it had room to breathe. Like, we had moments just in the car having conversations with Emmanuel and Dean, and then eventually Meg, and Meg even making fun of, Cass for not getting a joke. Or the flirtation joke about him being an angel. Like, there was room for levity and breath between so much happening. I mean, Sam is able to legitimately solve a case while locked in a psych ward. Like, yet it never felt like they were trying to take on too much. Like, it felt like they were spinning 3 or 4 plates, but they were doing a masterful job of it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So this episode was written by Sarah Gamble, directed by Robert Singer, and it originally aired on March 23rd, 2012. Now, this time, this is over a month after the last episode had aired. So if we're keeping count, this is 2 months since episode 15.
1, wow. 2, that kind of makes sense given what they did with this episode. They would have actually had time to absorb that feedback. And also kind of weird that we also took like a huge amount of time between recording.
I know, right? I know, that's very true.
Our life is becoming more like the show.
Oh no. This episode is a bit of a culmination of a few things that have been building up over the last season, and this is basically what we've been talking about, right? Like, we get Cass back, as we've mentioned, like Sam's mental health, quote unquote, a situation, because I really don't know how to call it. Like, it all really comes to a head.
Like mental health situation, hallucinations, like I just I think for the listener's sake, we might still use those terms because it's the way the show best represents it. But I think we also understand that like we're not using it in a clinical sense. Like we understand this isn't a medical diagnosis of Lucifer vision.
Well, that's why I'm saying mental health situation. A thing that exists for nobody else but Sam Winchester, basically.
He has to be special.
So do you remember how Repo Man like put a lot of work in terms of like trying to remind us, the audience, of like the supernatural good old days?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, this episode also reaches back for some familiar plot line. Like if we're thinking about Soulless Sam, if we're thinking about Dean and Cass's fight about putting Sam's soul back in his body, there's the cage, there's demons, Crowley's mentioned, Meg. Like there's just all of these things that are being thrown at us, either shown or mentioned.
We have this thing we need to solve, but along the way, can we just remind you of the good old days?
Yeah, exactly. Like, we promise you love us, remember?
I'm gonna use an example that I know you're gonna shrug at and you're gonna hate, but like this is like when your company throws a pizza party to remind you that they care.
Or gives you a certificate. When Dean is looking for somebody to help with Sam's, again, quote unquote, condition, there's like a gust of wind that seems to like magically offer a solution in the form of like a business card with a cell phone number handwritten in the back of it.
I have clearly not mentioned anything in this episode already that this might pertain to in future episodes regarding possible hauntings.
Right, so you've already seen Party on Garth, which I think we need to be very clear about, so you know that Bobby comes back. We'll talk about that in Party on Garth, but this is another little, like, nugget of, like, what is going on here?
Like, even if I may remove myself from Party on Garth, like, while I was super pleasant for that episode surprise, if I kind of, like, seclude myself to this episode, I was already going into this with the past incident where a page magically turned in the wind. When they were looking for the Amazons, I think it was.
The beer disappearing.
Well, the beer disappearing, we'll talk about that later. I still have my arguments about that weird one. But nonetheless, my point being, I'm already kind of in the loop of it would be kind of cool if surprise ghost Bobby. So this is leading more credence to it. So when I watch this, I already had that inkling, and we'll get to Party on Garth in a bit.
Yeah, next week. We see that one of the ways that Lucifer is torturing Sam is actually through hallucinations that have to do with food, which I think vindicates me that Sam's food issues actually have nothing to do with quote unquote health and everything to do with traumatic memories from the cage.
When this happened, I had a vivid memory of us discussing this the first time and rewatching the episode today to remind myself. It hit me again. Also, I think something in the X-Files recently had to do with food looking gross, so that's also been top of mind weirdly, but I digress. Nonetheless, yes, I think there is a level of Sam's food consumption having to do more with a level of control and peace in himself versus a air quotes healthy eating habits.
That's why whenever we talked about it, I was always like arguing that I didn't think it was that, which hopefully explains that now. Now that you've seen it, you're like, oh.
This makes more sense to me.
And I think that we also need to talk about Daphne a little bit, like beautiful green-eyed Daphne. Now, Drew, I have a little piece of homework for you. Can you please take out a pen and paper?
I'm gonna do. I don't know if actually, do I have pen and paper? I'm gonna do it on my screen. I have a notepad open.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to need you to write out the name Daphne. So that's Daphne. Okay? Now, can you please cross out the P and the H?
Gonna get rid of the P and the H.
Okay, what are you left with?
Dane. Huh. If you were to rearrange some of those letters, it would spell another name.
Interesting, huh?
That's weird.
Very weird.
This again is one of those things where it's like, I could see someone having written this name, thinking about this, and then just no one questioned it, and they were like, I'm leaving this in. Like, y'all are dealing with this.
We find out that Dean kept Cass's trench coat this whole time and moved it from car to car as they can't use baby at the moment.
That is one of those little moments where, like, I think again could go over someone's head of just like, oh, he kept the coat. But like they're not in a consistent vehicle. They are jumping car to car, they have no home base anymore. They are very much like if you're taking something with you, it's because it's vital and you need it.
Just a little like behind the scenes of that, like that was written into the script. And interestingly enough, like famously slash infamously, Jensen Ackles has talked about it, saying that at the beginning he was kind of against it, saying like Dean would never do that.
Interesting. Has he turned around on that?
We don't quite know as far as I'm aware, but and that was said like many, many years ago to be entirely like transparent about it. Again, it's interesting to see like the difference in opinion about a particular character even within the show, like the show creators basically. And the episode ends with Cass taking on Sam's supernatural mental illness and staying at the locked psychiatric facility with Meg as his nurse.
So, like I said, I rewatched this episode kind of as a refresher before recording because, as you said, it's been like a month since we've recorded, and I watched this a month ago. Initially, I did not really pick up on the conversation Sam and Dean were having right before the reveal of Meg getting the job. That they're kind of like a friend of my enemy is my friend type conversation. At first watch, I didn't catch that. So to me, it very much felt like Meg was just doing this behind their back sneakily. And then now I'm realizing, no, they clearly knew. And they're choosing to trust her. But I still feel like this is going to be some sort of ulterior motive Meg thing. Like, it feels too obvious for Meg to have this level of, like, I don't want to say control, but like power over Cass that's just going to abuse it somehow and will be a bigger issue.
Meg is a demon, right? Meg is a demon. We know how demons have been acting. The one thing that is like on the brothers' side is the fact that like she, like Sam said, is the enemy of their common enemy, Crowley, at the moment. So
That's it. Let's at least see where that goes because again, like I'm still kind of team Crowley in the long run, so we'll see what happens.
oh, Crowley never did anything wrong. I'm sorry. Like I love him. I love him.
He is a perfect little guy.
This week, our theme is reclamation. And like, this might seem like a very strong word for a theme, but I really do feel like this is what this episode does in so many ways that I'm so excited to actually dive into it with you. So, the word reclamation comes from the Latin reclamatio, which means like a cry of no, a shout of disapproval. So, like to cry out against, to protest. And in the 17th and 18th century, it also took on the meaning of like calling someone back and claiming a position as something taken away. Boy, do we have material to work with in this episode, both narratively and critically through this theme.
If I may start with Dean, do we ever see Dean reclaim something he lost today? Clearly, we will address the angel in the car. Cass is back and Dean is handling it surprisingly well. He's able to contain himself and be level headed about something that I don't think many would be able to do. Losing Cass started this major decline in Dean's happiness and health that has had him spiraling downward, pretty much aiming at a serious crash in the near future. Yet, despite this, and his pretty quick realization that this was actually Cass in front of him, he doesn't just immediately claim this as a solution, but approaches it cautiously, like he's been learning to this season, that he needs to take things slowly and talk through them and be smart about stuff and not jump to conclusions.
I am amazed at how differently we view this situation. Like, I just find it so interesting that you think Dean is handling this well. I think so. First off, like, I think that what you're saying is actually very true. Like, he has been learning this season that he does need to take it slow, that he can't just rush into things. So I think that, like, this is absolutely valid. When I look at this situation, like, I mostly see the inner turmoil about all this. Like, I think Dean handles getting Cass back, like, the same way that he handles everything else in his life. Like, if you don't talk about it, then everything is going to be okay. And you can see that when Meg shows up. Like, she's pretty much very clear from the get-go that they should tell Cass who he is, and Dean is having none of it. I think that there's two reasons for that. The first being that I don't think Dean really wants to have to talk things through with Cass. Not because he doesn't want to fix things, like to be very clear, but because hard conversations are really hard for Dean, and this one would be particularly hard. I also think that the second reason is that he's concerned about the effect that it would have on Cass. Like, remember that the last time that somebody lost their memory, namely Sam, with the wall in his head that was blocking like the memories from the cage, when Sam got his memory back again, like we're literally still dealing with that in this episode, right? So like he doesn't want Cass to be traumatized by those memories that he can't currently remember. He just can't lose him again right after getting him back.
So this is one of those rare times where we do look at a situation differently, and I completely see your side of things, but I genuinely do not feel like either one is particularly like the right versus the wrong decision. It's very much ambiguous, and the fact that we do get both sides of this, and like you're 100% right, like it very much is the, I don't want to say selfish Dean, but like the, I got what I want, let's not ruin this, let's not like go to the next step of dealing with things, let it just be what it is now, which could be very much for his own well-being, but at the same time can be for Cass's well-being, and we don't really ever get an answer as to which one he was leading in this moment, kind of like both are valid. And I think it's fine for someone to have two motives for the same action if both are beneficial in the long run. So like I love this. I think this is like one of Dean's like crowning like evolutions in this season.
Yeah, I agree.
And ultimately, at the end of the episode, we do get the Cass overhearing Dean and finally putting it all back together. That we get to truly see Dean get his Cass back properly. Yet Dean still seems so removed from this and does not accept it as like a free win. Like he sees Cass come back, he sees Cass get his memories back, he sees all this, but he never really celebrates it like, okay, we're back to a status quo. This season has beaten Dean so hard with the feeling stick that he simply doesn't trust anything to go right. So even getting his Cass back, he's not confident that it's real.
That's the fear that I'm sensing in Dean in this moment, right? Like, don't talk about it. Like when he's talking to Meg, for example, it's like that idea, like that anxiety of like, let's just not talk about it. Let's not make waves. Let's just keep the status quo as is because he's back. Like, and I don't want to do anything to risk it. Ultimately, like he gets him back, but he almost immediately has to leave him at the psychiatric facility, right? Like, so his fear of losing him does materialize. And it's so the reclamation isn't quite complete, but it's definitely a step better than what he had before, right? And Dean's like, we can find another way. Like, so there's just a lot of things that are going on. And it's like, okay, this is and just like from an audience standpoint, like a quick little detour into critical time, like you can't you can't show Cass, Misha Collins on screen, leave him in a psych facility, and then assume that the audience is just going to be okay with that forever, right? Like, you know that this is done for a reason, that eventually this is going to be fixed. We don't know how yet, but it is going to be. So, like, we as the audience know that this is a temporary situation.
I'd argue that even in an in-universe perspective, there's that same feeling because he basically was like, well, Sam's dead. I've just got to find a way to like save him through magic because nothing else is an option. And lo and behold, it works. So as much as there's not like another Cass who can come and cure Cass from his Lucifer, he at least knows it's possible.
Yeah.
Well, we saved one of you, we can save you again.
There's hope.
That's a good word. That show doesn't do it very often.
I know. There's a lot of despair, very little hope. So when there is hope, I think it's really important to name it.
So, like you said, like he does lose Cass all over again. And, there is the peace of mind of knowing he's at least alive. And he's just a different kind of lost now that he's stuck at the hospital with Lucifer in his head. And you might think that you would be painful for Dean, but like it doesn't really get addressed in the episode. And I suspect it may later on how he feels about getting Cass back and then losing him again. Like, I think that might still bubble up. But this does show us as an audience, as part of Dean, that he can have hope or be happy, while still suffering a little bit. If my recently lost love returned from the dead, professed his deepest apologies for his wrongdoings, and then suddenly was torn from me again in a way that I knew was within arm's reach, but I could not hold him, I'd be livid and like really pissed. Yet Dean, with what little time we get with him and post cast saving Sam, seems like he's just not phased by it, and not in like a negative, like he's blocking it out way, but just in a like somewhat civilized, understanding way. And I hope I'm wrong, and this was just like not in the episode, and we didn't get enough of it. But like, I do want to see him express himself a little more. Are we gonna get that? Probably not, but I want it.
The show will get into like the Dean and Cass conversation a little bit more. And I fully agree with what you're saying. Like, narratively, like, yes to everything. This episode does end pretty abruptly. Like, we've talked about it a bit earlier. And, I reiterate that it does end pretty abruptly. But the reasons for that are very linked to, like, the behind the scenes reasons that we've also discussed, right? And we will talk about that in a bit more detail in Critical Time.
So with Dean wrapped up, I guess we go to Sam. On the bright side, Sam does eventually reclaim his sanity and faculties, and we also see how close Lucifer came to reclaiming his vessel, albeit as a hallucination and less reclaiming, more defeating. But that was kind of Lucifer's goal, was just to really kill Sam, I think, at this point.
Wow, I never thought about the fact that, like, Sam's demise could actually mean that Lucifer would get his vessel back. I just thought that it would mean that, like, Sam would die, which in and of itself is pretty awful, right? But I think it's really because I saw Lucifer as purely a figment of Sam's imagination, or like his memories, right? Like, I didn't really see him as the actual Lucifer.
So I had gone back and forth on this argument for a while of whether this was all in Sam's head or if there was some supernaturalness to it more so. And given the way that Cass absorbed it, makes me feel like there's a bit more to it than just hallucinations at this point. Like, I don't think it was fully Lucifer in Sam's head, but like, I don't know, like a seed or a spore of Lucifer, like some part of him that could eventually take over if allowed to grow enough.
Did you just make an Mpreg joke? Is that what's going on?
You know what? Partway through the conversation, I thought I did, so I tried to swerve it into more of like the Last of Us fungus inspection. And I guess I didn't swerve as well as I thought I did, so let's
Lucifer's seed. Oh my god.
Yeah, I know. As soon as I said that word, I was like, I didn't mean that word. Fuck.
Oh my god.
I really do love how Sam, despite being locked up, starved, sleep deprived, was still able to help Marin like his old self. And it felt like Sam wasn't just doing it for her, but for himself to prove that he still could and he wasn't beaten. And I think reclaiming a part of yourself that might seem out of reach due to circumstances beyond your control like this can be so important. And speaking from personal experience, it can be a powerful tool in healing yourself.
Yeah, I mean, remember when we talked about like the meaning of reclamation, like that shout of no? I feel like this is really where we're seeing it, because Sam was really hanging on to that piece of himself. Like, Lucifer took so much away from him: his sleep, his safety, both physical and emotional. He inflicted like untold trauma on him. Like, I could go on, right? Like, we've been seeing this for the entire season. So Sam lost a lot of himself to Lucifer. And I think that helping Marin was like a way to remind himself of who he was, who he is actually. And it's his own shout of like, no, like, I'm unwell right now, but I'm a person who helps others. And so I'm going to help this person. And I think that it's really a testament to like how mentally strong Sam actually is. And I also think that he seems to know that like if things continue and he can't get any sleep, like he's actually going to die. And I think that, like if he has to die, then he wants to die as himself. And like, this is one thing that Lucifer just can't take away from him. It's Sam's shout of no.
If I'm going down swinging. But ultimately, Sam does reclaim his mind at the cost of the newly reunited cast now having to take his place, which I think is something that will likely see an effect on Sam. Like, I think there'll be a level of guilt that Sam's going to feel that, like, yes, Cass sort of put him in this place to begin with the whole, like, Sam, a Cass being all over the top in the end of last season. But like Sam's guilt for not having reclaimed his life on his own, but rather passing the pain on, I think is going to leave him with some sort of lasting pain or trauma that we're going to see develop.
I mean, maybe. I think it's important to remember that the whole reason why Sam is in this situation to begin with is because of Cass. Like, he's the one who broke the wall in his mind. And Cass does take full responsibility for that. And he apologizes to Sam. So it's pretty clear that, like, this is all a result of Cass's choices and that Sam would have died without Cass intervening. So, like, I understand what you're saying, but I do think that in this particular case, like, it's not like Cass just like helped Sam out of the goodness of his heart. You know what I mean? Like he felt compelled to right his wrongs, I guess.
Like, I cannot imagine a world in which we get to a part of the, whether it be this season or next season, however you want to work it, that they begin the how do we save Cass storyline, and Dean is all for it, and Sam's like, no, he put me there in the first place, he deserves this. I think ultimately Sam will be on Dean's side in this one. Like, I can't imagine that world. And it's like equal parts in my head of like Sam feeling like, yes, he did this to me, but he doesn't deserve this pain. I owe it to him. He saved me. I should save him, even if he started all this, because I'm a good person. In versus just the, it's my brother's boyfriend, I gotta save him.
Yes, absolutely. I fully agree with that. I think that that's what's going to happen. And we'll see. We'll see very soon. If we can move on to Cass very briefly, I do think that we need to talk about him for obvious reasons. Like, he's back. We get to talk about Cass again.
Yay! We get a third heading in our notes.
I know. I love that. I love that. I had missed it. I was like, so Cass reclaims his identity in this episode, right? Like, so for the last few months, he'd been living as Emmanuel, living as a married man, married to a woman named Daphne, which, like, okay, by the way, I need to talk about Daphne again because she has like 2 lines in this episode, but she's doing so much work. Like, she found a naked man with amnesia in the middle of the woods, and she was like, yes, this one's gonna be my husband. And then one day, a random man shows up at her house, saves her from a demon who had tied her to a chair, takes her husband on a car ride, and then never brings him back.
Right away, my brain is like, you know, that meme of Jeremy Clarkson. I linked it in the notes if you want to look at it, but just the, oh no. Anyway.
I mean, that's the thing. Maybe Daphne is going to be looking for her husband, you know?
And then, like, when she does eventually, like, in 7 seasons from now, when she eventually bumps into them on a case and is like, oh my god, Emmanuel, and Cass is be like, oh, right, yeah, I was married, shit,
Actually, one thing that I forgot to mention up in the long game is the fact that Cass is now married. Cass is married.
I don't know how to ask this question without just being like, spoil me. Do we ever see Daphne again?
We never see Daphne again.
Is she ever brought up again?
But Cass never gets a divorce.
Oh, and this is how polykills happen by mistake in fanfics.
I love this. I love this so much.
Cass coming back is great. Him being able to reclaim his identity and himself and his memories and, you know, ultimately take ownership for what he did to Sam. Very sacrificially, like, let me carry the burden type thing. Very, very Sam and Frodo there. It did really have like a hurried along kind of like, I almost would have liked an episode or 2 of Emmanuel figuring it out and like slowly getting things back versus just like, Meg flirted with me? No, I'm an angel. Let me smite some demons and I remember everything. Like, it was very quick and okay. Also, yeah, like you said, Deus Ex Daphne. Like, I feel like, again, I just did another recording on the Gate Leapers podcast where we did some really horrible fanfic readings. And man steps out of lake completely naked with no memory, just screams someone writing a supernatural fanfic to put them in one of the characters in a new scenario. So the fact that it fell into this season is just like chef's kiss of writing.
I will never talk about fanfiction in a bad way just because, like, you know.
Oh, that was not a negative thing. It just had very, like, fanficky tropes. Like it very much my first fanfic, it feels like.
So if we can come back to like Cass claiming or reclaiming his identity, we're seeing that like in this particular case, the process also comes with a lot of pain. He's feeling tremendous guilt and shame for the things that he's done, and rightfully so, right? Like let's let's be honest. And he's also overwhelmed with the fact that like he can never make it all right. And I think that that's also one of the reasons why he takes on Sam's Lucifer, right? His Lucifer situation. It's to make penance, basically.
For an episode that otherwise I feel like had very little to like pick at, like the Daphne thing almost is more comedic than it is silly. The on the noseness, which isn't a bad thing per se, of like Cass literally taking the blame and taking the consequences of his actions in such a literal sense, it's very blunt. But like, I'm very curious to see how this develops for Cass. I think just the moment where we do get like Cass's like one quick glimpse of Lucifer and he makes the comment his brother makes me very intrigued to see how they're going to move forward with this for Cass.
You awaken in the darkness of your bedroom, the shadows dancing across the floor as lightning strikes once again. Out of the corner of your eye, you think you see something move. You reach for your phone in hopes to illuminate something that you hope isn't there. Your fingers find only table as you place your palm flat on the empty space your phone once occupied. A tickle along your pinky as it collides with the charging cord. You slowly trace the cable down to the floor and underneath the bed. You don't recall the cable being nearly this long as you feel each nick and bend in it. Finally, you reach the end and you at last hold your phone, grabbing it and pulling both it and yourself back into the safety of your covers. The bright display flashes on, and suddenly your night vision, which had very slowly begun to adjust, is lost. You click on the flashlight, begin to scan your room, looking for anything, something you're certain must not be here. The shapes of darkness that once loomed eerily dissolve in the spotlight. Objects are revealed to you that once could have been creatures in the night, intent on devouring you. Soon your heart slows back down to its resting state, and your blood is no longer pumping loud enough for you to hear. You turn off the light once again, submerging yourself in a dark void, and let your phone return to its place on your bedside table. You pull the covers up around you, as close to covering your head as you can without suffocating, and you close your eyes before you begin to see anything else that may or may not be here with you.
If we go back to some critical discussions that we've had this season, we're going to remember that I had said that I thought that killing off Cass was a profound mistake on the part of the show. And I'm clearly not the only one who thought that, as I've mentioned before. When Cass died in Hello Cruel World, that was supposed to be his exit off the show. Like the character who was supposed to be in 3 episodes of season 4 was going to get killed off for good 3 seasons later. Or so the showrunner at the time, Sarah Gamble, thought. Fans were so upset by the decision that they wrote letters, they used social media, they campaigned basically to get Cass back on the show. And it worked. And so this episode was never meant to be the way that it was, like, which I think explains some of the awkwardness at the end. Like, they had already planned episodes to come after and before that. And so it did have to be kind of crammed into this one somewhat self-contained episode, right? So they had to find a way to bring Cass back, to shelf him for a little bit, and then to reorganize the end of the season to include him. So like that must have been, I can't even imagine what that must have been like in the writer's room, right? And I just think that this says so much about the power of fandom, particularly the supernatural fandom, and like the power that we have to say no to certain things. Changing gears like ever so slightly, I also want to come back to this idea of like the show being forced, I guess, to reclaim or to come back to its previous identity by referencing old episodes, like by bringing back demons, by bringing back Meg, and most notably by bringing back Cass. Um, this is all in an effort, really, to make good on the promise that was made to fans back in Repo Man 2 episodes ago, that the show was still the show that we'd all fallen in love with.
To know that now that there was this episode needed to be what it was, and the idea too of bringing Cass back and then finding a way to shelf him temporarily while they found a way to work him in properly to still be able to ultimately execute the vision they had for this season. Um, you know what? For anyone on that team who was involved in this, whether they were on board or against Cass's return, kudos for doing a really good job with this episode. I'm looking forward to the rest of this season and eventually getting Cass back in the main trio. But that is a lot. Like, I've been in some very small production teams doing things where, like, hey, last minute, huge shift, and having to scramble to fix stuff. That's impressive. So good for them for what they were able to do. And I am ultimately, like the fans who campaigned for this, happy with the results and excited for the future of the show more than I was in the last little bit. This week we have a message from Asher. Before we listen to it, we want to remind you to send us a 3-minute voicemail. To respond to anything we discussed today, you can use the recording app on your phone and just email us the recording at carryingwayward@gmail.com. We also want to remind you that Mary and I will be answering the question, have you ever reunited with someone after a long time, and how did it go? For our Roadhouse supporters on our Impala Talk. Stay to the very end of the episode to hear a short clip.
Hi Marie, hi Drew. My name is Asher. You can call me Ash or AJ. I go by he, they pronouns. Firstly, I want to start off like most voicemails do and say I absolutely love the show. I have technically listened almost from the beginning, but then I'll be honest in saying I didn't listen very closely. I was just listening to help you guys get higher numbers and bring people in, which was kind of a disservice to myself, honestly. I'm not even sure what fully got me back into listening, but I restarted from the beginning and actually listened to all of it, and I just absolutely regret not listening sooner. I was waiting to make a comment about the Heaven and Hell episode and things I didn't realize on my first watch through, but then I was listening today at work to season 6, episode 11, Appointment in Samara, and I just could not keep my thoughts to myself for a minute longer because it made my brain itch. I know Drew has watched Doctor Who, and if I'm correct, I believe neither of you have watched the BBC version of Sherlock that is a modern take on Arthur Conan Doyle's stories of Sherlock. I've seen all of Sherlock, and I actually watched Sherlock before I got into Supernatural, but I never made the connection before today. I think part of the reason this hit me is because only about a month ago I did a full rewatch, and in season 4, episode 1, it is named The Six Thatchers. I won't spoil the Sherlock episode, but we get told at the beginning of the episode the story of Appointment in Samara, which I'm going to quote directly from the Sherlock episode because the story itself is kind of ambiguous. But there was once a merchant in a famous market in Baghdad. One day he saw a stranger looking at him in surprise, and he knew that the stranger was Death. Pale and trembling, the merchant fled the marketplace and made his way many, many miles to the city of Samara, for there he was sure Death could not find him. But when at last he came to Samara, he saw waiting for him the grim figure of Death. "Very well," said the merchant. "I give in. I am yours. But tell me, why did you look surprised when you saw me this morning in Baghdad?" "Because," said Death, "I had an important appointment with you tonight in Samara." The message behind the story is that you cannot escape death. And that is essentially what this episode of Supernatural is stating. It is their time to die, and you cannot cheat death. I'm not super smart and critical, so I will leave the rest of analyzing this up to you guys, but I was listening to you talk about the characterization being off. And while I think it technically is for the characters themselves and the story as a whole, I feel like for this episode and the title, this kind of fit perfectly. And this is not, I don't think that the appointment in Samara is really something a lot of people know, but yeah, I just really wanted to share this and hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble. I hope this made any kind of sense, and I will talk to you guys later.
Asher, thank you so much for this voicemail. Like I so appreciate it. First off, I have watched Sherlock, the BBC version. I was pretty obsessed with it at some point. I am a little less well versed with the last season just because I simply did not enjoy it as much as I enjoyed the rest of the series. So like the Six Thatchers, I have watched a little less, but I do remember. So I had watched BBC Sherlock before Supernatural. But then when I went back to BBC Sherlock out, because I usually do a rewatch at least of the first couple of seasons, like every Christmas for some reason. Like it just feels like a very Christmassy thing to do. Although I didn't do it this year, actually. Note to self. Maybe one day that it's like snowing, I'll just put it on. When I did one of those rewatches, I was listening to the Six Thatchers and I was like, oh my God, they're telling the story of Appointment in Samara. And then I thought back to that Supernatural episode. Now, I can't remember what we said about that episode, unfortunately. We talked about the characterization being off, but I mean, I think, okay, now you're giving me brain worms. You're you're making my brain itch because you cannot escape or cheat death. I mean, I think that this is something that's going to become very apparent, especially nearer the end of the series, in ways that I can't really quite talk about right now. Oh my God. Oh no. Hey Jay,
I
what
love
have
when
you
you get
done?
trapped by these comments.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really thinking about the last season of Supernatural right now, about not being able to escape or to cheat death. That's all I can say. That's all I can say. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Well, I can swoop in and steal the conversation for a bit because I have what to say. And firstly, Ash, thank you. I too have watched the BBC Sherlock, and like you, Mary, the first like 6 episodes, seasons 1 and season 2, I feel like I've watched multiple times, but everything since then, I don't think I've gone back to. So while I know the episode by title, and I did do a quick Google search as we were listening to the voicemail, it's one of those things that where I need to go back and watch it again now that I've seen the episode Appointment in Samara and I've read the corresponding short story slash poem. So I'm very intrigued to like kind of have that like real. I want to have the itch you had, Ash, again. So I think that'll be the rest of my day today. Will be some Sherlock binging. But the one thing we talked about the characterization, I remember having a bit of a conflict with the way Dean treated some of the I want to say victims in air quotes here that he had to take, and how he let the first guy suffer because he was kind of like, this guy's an ass, he deserves it. And then there's the gentleman who has the heart attack for eating too much, and he kind of has another like, I'm not gonna like let him suffer, but I'm still gonna be a dick towards him because he kind of did it to himself. And then ultimately the little girl who he's like, I don't want to kill, and then he sees the chain of his like negative choices and how like very final destination-y, you can't escape death. Death comes for us all in the end. You can prolong the inevitable, but you're only gonna make things worse. I have that very like solid like mental image of Dean in my head right now, and I want to hold on to it because I am now going to go rewatch the Six Thatchers with the rest of Sherlock as a whole, and I really want to get to that. And I also kind of feel proud that I finally have completed the trifecta of the Super Who Lock, and I've now I'm in Supernatural. I'm literally doing a Doctor Who rewatch as we speak. I just also watched an episode like 3 days ago that is like not an emotional episode by much, and I cried my fucking eyes out.
You're officially a 2013 fangirl on Tumblr. I love it.
Ash, ultimately, thank you. This has been a fun thought exercise. I'm looking forward to following up by watching Sherlock. So obviously, when you hear this episode, hopefully by then I've tweeted a little bit about this to at least kind of like give an end to this thought bubble instead of leaving it hanging here. So I guess it's a quick plug to our socials by mistake.
Do you want to give your Twitter handle, Drew?
Oh, at Boxless Thought, but you'll often see it tweeted and shared through the at Carrying Wayward account along with Mary's account. So it's all there.
Do you have any reflection and call to action this week?
This episode reminds me that like I really like helping people, and helping someone can also help you. I often feel so much better about myself and with my own issues, even if I'm not actively working to fix them. But if I could then take the energy and help someone else, you know, bringing joy to others can help lift myself up from a dark place. So even when I'm having a bad day or I've received bad news, if I can somehow twist that into a way where I could use that energy to help people or even just bring a smile to a friend's face, it makes me feel so much better, and then ironically does help me. So this episode reminds me, maybe not absorb someone's literal inner demons, but help them because it can help myself.
Definitely.
And you, Mary, your thoughts and calls to action this week?
I find that Sam's grit to hold on to his identity is really moving in this episode. And it's honestly just making me feel called to think about like what traits of myself I consider to be integral to my own identity.
You've been listening to Carrying Wayward, a supernatural podcast produced by Rochelle Castellano, hosted by Mary Vigouroux and myself, Drew Schulman. Thank you to everyone supporting us on Ko-fi or Patreon, and an extra thank you to our bunker supporters, Elle, Jeremiah Thomas, and Simone.
This week, we'd like to thank Asher for the message. You can go to carryingwayward.com for the links to our merch store and all of our socials.
If you'd like to support us, you can become a patron or a Ko-fi subscriber. You can also leave us a rating on Spotify and a review on Apple Podcasts.
Carry on, our wayward friends.
I think there's also a weird bias, like how long you knew the person before the break. Like there's a weird math equation there of like, if I knew you for 3 years and we went 3 years without seeing each other, versus if I knew you for 20 years and went 3 years without seeing you, like it does feel different.